Hey guys, tonight we drift beneath the velvety black skies of the 9th century Abbasid Caliphate. You're not alone. The call to prayer has long since echoed across the Tigris, and the stars are already elbowing each other for space above Baghdad's rooftops. You tiptoe barefoot through a garden so fragrant and surreal it might as well be a dream, or perhaps someone else's memory. The scent of orange blossom clings to the folds of your linen robe. To your left, a fountain shaped like a lion coughs up water into a marble basin. The splash echoes like lazy applause. To your right, a pomegranate tree droops heavy with fruit and secrets. You pause beneath a moonlit arch laced with honeysuckle, your hand brushing against a wall still warm from the day's sun. Somewhere ahead, you hear the gentle crunch of gravel. A gardener walking slowly, perhaps carrying a basket of figs. Or something far more delicate. And here's the truth, you probably wouldn't survive this place. Between political plots disguised as tea ceremonies and the casual expectation that everyone memorizes 300 plant names by candlelight, you'd be politely shown to the exit or escorted by guards. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and the local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you're listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step past a curtain of hanging vines and into a courtyard. Everything glows blue in the moonlight. Tiles leave skin. You reach out to touch a low-hanging lemon, and for a moment time folds 1,000 years backward, and you're in the golden heart of Abbasid Baghdad capital, of an empire that stretches from the Atlantic to the Indus River. But tonight, we're not following armies or chasing scholars. No. We're digging into the dirt, literally. Because this story is about gardening. Not just gardening, but the kind that turns deserts into paradise. The kind that layers roses and basil with poetry and power, where one wrong choice of plant could signal rebellion or romance. Abbasid gardens weren't just for show. They were statements, weapons, invitations, and sometimes vaults of forbidden knowledge. And you're walking right through one. The moonlight catches the edge of a silver ewer left on a stone table still beaded with condensation. Someone's been steeping something fragrant. Maybe mint, or maybe sweet wormwood, used to ward off mosquitoes and allegedly bad dreams. You walk on. Every corner you turn, something blooms. A marigold to cheer the melancholic. Damask rose prized for its oil, basil for memory, mint for digestion, and tucked in a shaded corner, a spindly sharp plant used to dye cloth the deepest indigo. It smells like rain and soil and chemistry. Here's your first Abbasid gardening secret symmetry. These weren't wildflower meadows. Gardens were rigorously planned, mapped in quadrants. 4 sections divided by 2 channels that crossed in the middle echoes of ancient Persian Jaharbag design, symbolic of paradise, of divine order, of balance. Even chaos here had structure. You pause beneath a pergola where vines curl lazily along wooden beams. A low couch sits beside a trickling stream. On it, pillows embroidered with calligraphy. You can't read it, your classical Arabic's a little rusty, but chances are it's a line of poetry about loss or longing, or the taste of cherries in May. You settle in, sinking into cushions that smell faintly of cedar and clove. A breeze stirs the garden cool, deliberate like the breath of the earth itself. You listen. This garden is a living manuscript. A page that rustles and breathes and bruises under your fingertips, and the people who shaped it, they're ghosts now, but they've left fingerprints in the layout, in the seeds, in the way the moonlight hits that particular patch of white lilies. Let's talk about those ghosts, because for every caliph who ordered a garden built there were 100 hands that dug, lifted, trimmed, and carried. Some were slaves born into servitude, others were hired craftsmen, artisans in irrigation, pruning, and sand layering. Yes, that was a job. And a few were scholars, blending Greek texts with Persian herbals, writing by lamplight with one eye on the stars and the other on the soil. There's a fringe theory that some of these gardens had sand-paved roads where plants were arranged not by color but by smell, with different blends triggered by wind direction. You'd never notice unless you walked it at the right hour or had the right nose. You reach down, fingers grazing the soil beneath a fig tree, still warm. It crumbles slightly between your thumb and forefinger, fine, moist, well turned. This isn't accidental. This garden is fed by a network of hidden aqueducts, some carved into the stone beneath your feet, others lined with clay pipes sealed with egg whites and ash. Historians still argue whether the Abbasids invented certain water pressure systems or simply adapted older Mesopotamian and Persian techniques. What's agreed, it worked. Gardens this lush don't just happen. They're built. A shadow flits by. Just a cat. Sleek board, clearly in charge. Probably guarding something. Or someone. In the distance, a palm frond rustles, and something ripe falls with a wet plop. You're not startled. This place is gentle even in its mysteries. And so you drift deeper, drawn forward by moonlight and jasmine, by the quiet promise that there's more to see, more to learn. The air carries a note of citrus now. Your eyelids get heavier. The garden doesn't mind. It's been here longer than you, and it knows how to wait. You don't realize how far you've wandered until you look back, and there's no path, just a shimmer of petals and shadow. You're somewhere new now, somewhere hidden. That's the real secret of these gardens. They were never meant to be entirely understood. They were meant to be walked. And you've only just begun. You're no longer alone in this garden. Though no one speaks, the presence is unmistakable, layers of lives folded into every stone path and watered root. The air seems thicker here, enriched not just with the scent of myrtle and saffron, but with memory. Someone once stood exactly where you're standing, clutching a bundle of time ice, darting to the shadows. A gardener, a spy, a poet on a midnight stroll. No, tonight you're about to meet the ones. History often forgets the invisible gardeners of the Abbasid Caliphate. Not caliphs in embroidered robes or viziers quoting Aristotle, but the men and women whose knees ground into soil, who knew every seasonal sigh of this earth, who planted papyrus in one corner and basil in another because they understood their feud. You walk now between two raised beds, one's edged with spearmint, the other with tender chamomile, and tucked beneath their leaves footprints, bare, narrow, recently made. You follow them. The Abbasid elite didn't get their hands dirty, but their worlds, their poems, their politics, all rooted in dirt cultivated by others. Slaves from Nubia, groundskeepers, from Khorasan gardeners, descended from Zoroastrian priests who treated soil as sacred, eunuchs who ran the royal grounds like clockwork, men who couldn't write their names yet could graft a pear tree faster than you can boil water. You crouch now, examining a woven basket left on the edge of the fountain. Inside cloves, dried hibiscus slivers of aloe vera, a small scroll tied with string. You're tempted to open it, but something in the quiet holds you back. Maybe this was a recipe, or a spell, or simply today's garden report: moisture levels, wind patterns, squirrel activity. Historians still argue whether Abbasid gardens were maintained primarily by free craftsmen or enslaved laborers. The truth probably lies, as it usually does, somewhere tangled in between. Contracts from the time mention highly skilled foreign gardeners imported like artifacts. Others tell of young boys trained from age 6 whose entire lives orbited compost and cane. But here's the twist. These invisible hands were anything but uninspired. They innovated, adapted. They built shade structures with leaves arranged by density. They crushed snail shells into the soil to combat rot. They tucked citrus rinds at the base of rose bushes to discourage ants. The caliphs issued orders. The gardeners made it work. You pass a set of low stone steps slick with condensation. At the base, a wall inscribed with quiet elegance, not Quranic verse or royal decree, but a line that reads simply, "We knew the plants by their size," perhaps carved by a literate groundskeeper, or maybe added centuries later by someone nostalgic for that era when soil mattered more than scrolls. Another fact less romantic, some of these gardeners were trained in prisons. Seriously, an experimental program under Caliph Harun al-Rashid reportedly rehabilitated certain prisoners by teaching them garden science, composting, grafting, aqueduct maintenance. A few even rose to oversee entire estates. Talk about upward mobility via rosemary. You brush your hand along the edge of a low wall where tiny vines curl like calligraphy. Behind it, a sleeping area pillows, worn thin, a clay jug tipped on its side. A gardener's rest spot. No silk, no perfume. Just woven mats, the scent of neem oil, and a pile of sweet limes. You sit for a moment imagining the kind of day that ends in such a place. Dawn pruning, midday irrigation checks, late afternoon seed sorting, sunset compost turning. Your back would ache in places you didn't know existed. The moonlight shifts, casting silver across the garden's geometry. You notice something you missed before, a thin trench no wider than your palm connecting every quadrant. Water channels. Designed to trickle, not gush. To hydrate without flooding. It's not just efficient, it's intentional. Quiet. Thoughtful. Like its makers. Here's the quirky part. Some Abbasid gardens had what we call today companion plant pairings. Not for flavor or pest control, but for mood. Lavender with lemon balm to calm. Basil with marjoram to awaken. And oddly, mustard greens planted beside roses believed to defend their honor from disease. There's zero science behind it. But the belief persisted, and so did the pairings. You step over one such planting now. The basil practically hums. Not far off, you hear soft humming, not from the plant, but from a man. Hunched, gray-bearded hands coated in soil. He doesn't see you, of course. This is memory, not magic. Still, you watch him pluck a leaf, crush it between calloused fingers, then press it to his temple. A headache. A ritual. A superstition passed down like a family recipe. Historians still argue about the training of Abbasid gardeners. Some say they relied entirely on oral tradition. Others insist there were manuals, illustrated, systematic, and largely lost, but fragments survive. Notes on soil acidity, best pruning months, irrigation warnings. One even includes a line about singing to cucumbers to make them bold. No one knows if that's metaphor or madness. But the cucumbers, they were reportedly enormous. A breeze stirs the citrus trees, and the smell is overwhelming, sweet, sharp, alive. You wander deeper past a bench inlaid with turquoise, past a trellis covered in night-blooming jasmine. Every plant you see is a testament not to caliphal power, but to quiet labor. That's the real magic of these gardens. You think you're in a place of splendor, arches, water, fragrance, but you're actually in a place of work. Generations of people whose names weren't recorded, whose work was. And unlike empires, it still grows. The path darkens slightly now as you pass into a more shaded zone. The trees are older here, the air cooler. You feel like the garden is folding around you, welcoming you not as a guest, but as a witness. It's an odd thing, this quiet reverence. And as you settle once more on a cool stone seat, your fingers trailing through the carved patterns in the tile, you realize not all builders leave palaces. Some leave petals, some leave shade, some leave water that still sinks, and all of them once were invisible. You wake, if you ever truly slept, to the sound of dripping, slow, steady, like time marking its passage in droplets. The sky above is lighter now, not quite dawn, but enough to turn shadows from inky black to soft charcoal. You follow the sound feet, brushing gravel sandals, whispering against stone. You pass under a low arch, its top dusted with spider webs and the faint scent of mildew. And then you see it. An irrigation wheel. Not just any wheel. An oria. Wooden as tall as two men, its curved paddles dipping into the stream that runs behind the palace walls. As it turns creaking in rhythm with your breath, it scoops water into clay jars attached to its frame. Those jars rise, spill into a stone channel, and begin their long journey across the garden like tiny offerings from the earth itself. This is the part no one talks about when they praise the Abbasid lushness. That lushness. It had plumbing. Complex, elegant, hidden plumbing. Welcome to the secret art of irrigation, or what might as well be alchemy in a place where rainfall is a rumor, and the tigris can be temperamental. You crouch by the canal and throw your fingers through the water. Cool. Alive. It winds through the garden like a quiet snake, its surface occasionally broken by a floating citrus rind or an adventurous beetle. And along its edges, small gates sakia, the movable wooden valves that let gardeners direct flow as needed. Water a melon bed in the morning, flood the mint patch at dusk. Historians still argue whether these irrigation systems were native innovations or inherited from Sasanian and Roman models. But what's clear is the Abbasids didn't just adapt, they refined. They layered canals atop Qanat's underground tunnels that collected water from faraway aquifers. Some Qanats ran for miles beneath the earth, emerging in palace courtyards like miracles. You pass a stone bench. There's something carved into the side, shallow hasty scratches, as if made by a bored hand. You squint. Water remembers. Not poetry. Not quite, but close. Further on, the Noria's channel splits. One path goes toward the fig trees, the other toward a grove of lemon and bitter orange. Above, slits in the wall allow sunlight to hit only certain plots in the morning. Gardeners here weren't just irrigating, they were manipulating time and temperature, creating microclimates with geometry and stone. It's here you spot the strangest thing yet, a collection of mirrors. Just small ones, set into clay bowls, angled up toward the sun. You stare confused. Were these decorative? Or something else? Turns out it was a French theory some Abbasid gardeners used reflected sunlight to wake up certain herbs. Basil, marjoram, even lavender, believing it improved their scent and potency. Is it true? Who knows? But it's clever and bizarre and oddly charming. Imagine adjusting your parsley's personality with a sunbeam. The air smells of copper and wet clay now. You follow the water channel as it narrows, curving around a raised bed where young mint bushes stretch toward the dawn. A small boy stands nearby, shirtless, barefoot, holding a long reed. He dips it into the canal, stirring gently, aerating, fishing, playing, maybe all three. He looks up briefly, not at you, but toward a fig tree where a bird has just landed. He smiles, This garden wasn't built for one kind of person. It was a playground, a laboratory, a sacred space. And its water, its lifeblood, was protected like a treasure. Caliphs issued edicts around it. Disputes over irrigation timing led to fistfights. Entire villages were relocated when water rights changed. Abbasid water law, much like their poetry, was written in loops and metaphor, but make no mistake, it had teeth. You step carefully over a narrow wooden bridge. Beneath it, a second channel runs deeper, cooler water, almost black in the pre-dawn light. It smells faintly of sulfur and rose oil. Curious. You crouch and dip a finger in. Still warm. That's the Abbasid trick. They didn't just water with any water. Sometimes it was perfumed. Not for plants, well, not just for plants, but for guests. Imagine walking into a garden where the irrigation system itself smells like a luxury soap. Rosewater saffron infusion. Even citrus peel teas. If Versailles was about mirrors, Baghdad was about scent. And that scent carried through palace windows, across corridors, through curtain gaps. It told a story long before anyone said a word. Another debate for you. Historians can't agree if these scent waters were used daily or only on feast nights. One scholar insists they were just for religious processions. Another claims the practice was widespread, tied to beliefs about scent and divinity. You decide to believe both. After all, this garden isn't ruled by logic. It's ruled by rhythm. You rest now at the foot of a tall trellis, while creeping vines flower in clusters of pale yellow. The canal bubbles nearby, and from a hidden spout, you hear a short splash water being redirected somewhere else. Always flowing, always shifting, always feeding something unseen. Nearby, a long wooden pole rests beside a clay jar. It's not a gardening tool, it's a dipstick, used to measure water levels in underground cisterns. That's how exact this all had to be. You didn't guess, you calculated. Gardeners were expected to monitor soil moisture with fingertip tests and shadow watches. They even paid attention to the sound of the water-deep gurgles meant clogged channels. Soft hissing meant leaks. And somewhere in the royal records you'd find entire ledgers on irrigation usage. How much went to citrus? How much to apricots? How many drops wasted that might earn a gardener a fine or a new posting somewhere much, much drier? You lie back now, staring up at a patch of sky framed by grapevine leaves. The stars are fading. Dawn is blushing at the edges of the horizon. And still, the irrigation wheel turns. A creak, a splash, a whisper of purpose. It's hypnotic, really. The way they made desserts bloom. Not by magic, not by miracle, but by pulling water up from the bones of the earth and teaching it to dance. That's the secret, isn't it? Not power, not poetry, but control. Quiet, steady, sacred control. The air shifts again, lighter now as dawn stretches her pale fingers through the treetops. But you don't leave. Not yet. You followed water, traced footsteps, watched invisible hands shape paradise. But now it's time to slip into the minds behind it all. The ones who didn't carry shovels but pens. Welcome to the candlelit chambers of the Abbasid alchemists. You round the corner and find yourself in a small courtyard, walled on all sides except for a single arched entry. In the middle sits a rectangular reflecting pool, still and black as ink. Ivy coils along the stone edges like handwriting. Beside it, a wooden writing desk. An oil lamp flickers faintly, even as daylight begins to win the sky. This is not a garden in the usual sense. It's a thinking space, a green laboratory. You sit. The bench is warm, the wood smooth with centuries of thought. Nearby, a wax tablet lies open stylus still resting. Someone left it. The first word etched on the soft surface, Al-Rayhan bezel. Abbasid botanists weren't just plant lovers. They were chemists, pharmacists, philosophers, and sometimes even spies. Their work went beyond naming plants or describing petals. They categorized behavior, how roots responded to drought, what time of day a leaf opened, how long a scent lingered on silk. And they did it all by candlelight. You peer closer at the tablet. A small diagram shows the anatomy of a leaf, its veins drawn like irrigation maps. Below it, a note about dew. Something like harvest best before the sun dries the soil. Poetic. Possibly literal. Possibly both. Historians still debate whether these notes were scientific observations or mystical interpretations. Some scholars argue Abbasid botany leaned more spiritual than practical. Others point to detailed studies of root systems and soil types as proof of hard data collection. You glance at the table again and notice a strange object, a carved wooden box with holes on the lid. Inside you lift the top, dried petals, carefully labeled damask, rose black cumin, blue poppy, and something called shakaran, a mysterious herb mentioned in only 2 surviving texts and believed to induce dreams of flying. Beside the box is a scrap of paper, a torn corner from a larger manuscript. On it a quote: "To understand the garden, you must borrow the patience of the seed." That's the kind of wisdom these botanists trafficked in. Part science, part sermon. All softly lit by oil lamps and the glow of curiosity. You walk now through a covered corridor lined with earthenware jars. Some hold dried herbs, others liquids, suspiciously viscous. Labeling here is minimal. Just small symbols carved into the clay star's crescent dots. Likely a personal code. A way to protect recipes from wandering eyes. Because here's a quirk, many Abbasid botanical texts were encoded. Written in metaphors, flipped grammars, or riddles. Why scholars aren't sure. Some suggest it was to preserve secrets. Others say it was simply fashionable, a sign of sophistication. Either way, it makes translation today a nightmare. You pause by a niche in the wall. A shelf carved into stone holds 3 scrolls wrapped in silk. You don't dare unroll them, but you know what they are: al-ilm, al-nabat, the science of plants. Dozens of versions once existed, most lost. A few copied by hand in Spain, then carried back east by traveling scholars. Inside those scrolls, everything. How to extract oil from cinnamon bark. Which plant could cure melancholy. What herbs should be planted near water for better dreams. And this a theory that plants feel pain, not like humans, but in vibrations. Yes, that's right. One particularly eccentric botanist once claimed basil would sulk for days if picked roughly. No empirical proof, of course. But charming, isn't it? Historians still argue whether Abbasid botanical texts influenced later European herbals, or whether both drew from shared Greek and Persian roots. What's certain is that the Abbasids treated plants not just as food or medicine, but as intellectual companions. You find a low shelf under a window. On it, a cluster of tools, a curved knife, a scoop, a fine brush made of squirrel hair. Not for gardening, for studying. Each leaf dissected like scripture, each petal mapped like terrain. You run your fingers over the brush. It's soft, precise, like the work it once did. Outside, a nightingale begins to sing. Loud, off-key, beautiful. You remember reading somewhere that Abbasid scholars believed birds sang in different languages at dawn, and that each language corresponded to a plant. Nightingales for roses, doves for palm, sparrows for barley. A poetic way to categorize sound, perhaps. Or an elaborate mnemonic system. The scent of dried rose intensifies now. Someone has left a bowl of potpourri near the entrance. Crushed petals orange peel a splash of vinegar. You breathe it in. A chemical lullaby. At the far end of the courtyard, you see what looks like a blackened wall. Burned, no charcoal painted, and written across it hundreds of plant names in flowing calligraphy. A graffiti garden. You trace your eyes along the names Asafoetida Fenugreek Camphor Ruhena. And there it is again. Shakaran. Underlined. Twice. There's a story barely remembered of a gardener who claimed to have grown a patch of shakaran that glowed faintly in moonlight. No one believed him. He vanished not long after. Some say he became a dervish. Others claim he was eaten by his own plants. Probably neither. Still, it makes you look twice at that vine curling up the pillar beside you. Time to leave the courtyard. You step back into the main garden, blinking at the brightness. The sun is fully risen, now gold washing over the pomegranate trees, the mint beds, the tile mosaics. But something has changed. You've been inside a mind, and now the garden feels different. Less floral arrangement, more philosophy. You walk slower. You notice more. A cluster of ants hauling a petal. A lizard blinking from the shade. A gardener in the distance humming something old, something nameless. And in your pocket one of those dried petals. You didn't take it, but it's there. You walk now with something new in your step, not just the hush of early morning or the memory of candlelit scrolls, but a whisper of absurdity. Because the next thing you see, turning the corner behind a hedge of tamarisk and lemongrass, is a peacock. Yes, a peacock. Strutting like it owns the garden, which, come to think of it, it very nearly does. It tilts its head at you, then turns its back tail, feathers trailing like a velvet robe dipped in stars. As it vanishes between two orange trees, you wonder why is a peacock wandering so close to the royal mint. That's not a joke. Because as you emerge into the next courtyard, sunlight dapples across a strange fusion of elegance and economics. Marble fountains flank long rectangular garden beds. And at the far end sits a low dome structure with iron-barred windows and guards posted just out of sight. The Mint. A place where coins are struck, measured, and weighed. But here's the twist. Rather than tucking the mint away in some fortress, Abbasid architects placed it inside the palace gardens, in some cases even adjoining orchards or pomegranate groves. Why, historians still argue. Some say it was symbolic money growing in the same soil as dates and citrus, implying prosperity. Others suggest practical reasons, easier to supervise both horticulture and finance from the palace's inner ring. One particularly romantic theory claims the caliphs liked to smell basil while reviewing fiscal reports. You wander toward the mint's outer walls. The scent here is strange, not just floral, metallic, sharp. It cuts through the morning air, and you spot the source of a long chalk line with mint and sage fed by the same channel used to cool the mint's coin molds. Cooling water, plus aromatic plants. A currency system that literally smells like success. And yes, the peacocks were real, not just for show. They served an odd practical purpose, acting as both pest deterrents and alarm systems. Sharp-eyed, territorial, and very, very loud when annoyed. If you were smuggling silver discs out under your robe, you did not want to pass a suspicious peacock. There's even an odd fringe belief that the patterns in a peacock's tail represented divine order and that placing them near the mint helped bless the currency. Totally unverified. But the Abbasids did love a good symbol. You pass now under a short arcade where fig vines hang like drapery. The walls are painted with simple motifs, coins, stylized trees, fountains. One small image shows a gardener offering a bowl of lemons to a scribe holding what looks like a scale. No words, just an exchange. Perhaps a nod to another truth fruit and coin had similar weight in this world. both could purchase favor. Both could rot if left unattended. You pause near a low bench, and there it is again, the quiet tension of the Abbasid garden. Beauty and bureaucracy, romance and record-keeping. Your eyes trace a path of blue tiles, winding toward a small outbuilding, half storage, half study. Inside scrolls are piled alongside sacks of dried apricots and pistachios. A balance scale sits beside a stack of minted dirhams. Nearby, a ledger lies open noting weights, yields and exchange rates. And at the top, in bold stylized script, Garden Economy, year 215, AH. Yes, even Paradise had spreadsheets. Some of these gardens weren't just for pleasure. They were economic engines producing spices, fruit, herbs, and flowers that were sold in Baghdad's sprawling markets. Cinnamon from Kerala planted beside Abbasid jasmine. Saffron grown in small plots and measured like gold dust. Even opium poppies in some sections heavily guarded, of course. You walk now among the trees where sacks of dried blossoms hang like sleeping bats from the branches. Harvest ready for market. A gardener, just visible behind a screen of reeds, trims a branch with careful precision. You watch his hands steady, patient, calloused. One slip and the branch is ruined. Same with the mint. Same with the empire. It's all connected. You follow a gravel path between two rose hedges, white on one side, deep red on the other. The scent is unreal. And suddenly you understand something: these gardens weren't merely background for Abbasid power. They were the power. They trained the eye, trained the hand, trained the mind. Because when you can measure coin and cut basil with the same calm breath, you control more than just currency. You control culture. And if a peacock squawks at a thief in the middle of all this, well, that's just good security design. You reach the edge of the courtyard again. The sun is higher now, shadows shorter. A fountain in the shape of a lion gurgles behind you, its mouth spilling clean, cold water onto a mint-scented breeze. You inhale, you smile. Out of the corner of your eye, a flash of indigo feathers. The peacock's back. He pauses, looks at you, then keeps walking. Some kingdoms are ruled with swords, others with soil, sand and coins that smell faintly of sage. You take another turn, this time toward the sound of soft voices. Not loud, not singing, not prayer. It's the hush of deep conversation. And as you approach a shaded pavilion draped in climbing bougainvillea, you realize the voices aren't soldiers, merchants or clerics. They're philosophers. And someone just said something about figs. You linger at the edge of the pavilion. Inside, 6 men sit cross-legged on cushions, arranged in a half circle around a low brass table. The table is mostly covered in scrolls, but also, yes, figs. Ripe, split, glossy inside like stained glass. One of them gestures with a fig half as he talks. You can't help smiling. This is the Abbasid way: mix the sublime with the snackable. The discussion drifts in and out of metaphor. A scholar in a green robe says the fig is a metaphor for divine knowledge, sweet inside but bitter when unripe. Another argues that all plants speak the language of submission, and thus gardening is a form of prayer. A third claims basil grows faster when recited to with kindness, and cites a Greek philosopher whose name you don't quite catch. You've stumbled into one of the Abbasid garden salons, part botanical symposium, part philosophical debate, part very polite snack break. These gatherings weren't held in halls or lecture rooms, but under pergolas, beside reflecting pools, surrounded by lavender and marjoram. It's easy to see why. The garden wasn't just a backdrop, it was an intellectual engine. Plants became metaphors, soil became a metaphor. Even sunlight had theological implications. Was it divine favor or scientific necessity? Historians still argue whether these salons were purely academic or secretly political, most likely both. Here, a comment on rose pruning could be a subtle critique of governance. A jab at soil erosion might really be about courtly decay. You settle on the low wall close enough to listen far enough to vanish if needed. One philosopher quotes Al-Jahiz, who once described the date palm as the mother of patience. Another counters with a hadith involving the olive tree. A younger man, barely 20, asks whether the sourness of unripe grapes reflects the anger of neglected wisdom. The others nod as if he's just quoted the moon. And then someone tosses a fig toward the fountain. You hear it splash. Here's a quirky thing: Abbasid philosophers loved figs, not just as food, as subjects. The fig appears in treatises on medicine, metaphysics, and even optics. One particularly eccentric manuscript suggests the fig's shape mirrors the curvature of time and should be studied before conducting arguments on infinity. That manuscript unfortunately was destroyed when a pigeon made off with a key page. True story. Or at least that's what one source claims. The scholars begin to discuss air, more specifically scented air, whether it affects memory. One man insists that rosemary enhances recollection. Another points out that the Prophet Muhammad was said to have loved perfume and sweet smells. They agree on something rare, that scent is the fastest path to memory, even grief. You lie back now, arms folded behind your head, and let the debate drift past like cloud shadow. The fig tree above you trembles slightly, and a single leaf spirals down, landing on your chest. At the far end of the pavilion, a servant arrives with a tray. More figs, of course, but also pomegranate slices, mint tea, and small cones of honey-drenched almonds. No one thanks him aloud, but everyone takes something. It's here that your thoughts drift to a detail you hadn't considered. Food in the Abbasid garden wasn't just sustenance, it was a language. Offer someone a pomegranate. You're wishing them wisdom. Grapes pleasure. A quince. Possibly an apology. But the fig was layered, intimate, inviting. In some circles, even romantic. Its presence in a conversation changed the tone, nudged the meaning. A fig between rivals could cool tempers. A fig passed across a table might speak of peace, or longing, or challenge. You wonder how many treaties were signed over shared fruit. There's an old fringe theory, never proven, that certain Abbasid philosophers chose their meeting times based on fruit ripeness. That debates on mortality happened during plum season. That justice was discussed among oranges. That forbidden questions only arose when the melons were perfectly ripe. You hope that's true. The conversation under the pergola quiets now. A breeze rustles the papers. One scroll is rolled up. A sandal slips. The young scholar yawns. The fig bowl is empty. And then softly, reverently, someone begins to recite a poem. You don't catch every word, but the rhythm is gentle, almost botanical. The final lines. And if I die in a garden, let no one mourn. Just bury me in basil, and I shall perfume the dirt. No one claps. They just sit with it. The wind moved through the fig leaves like applause. You rise slowly, step away from the wall, back into the sunlight. The path ahead is shaded by myrtle. A fountain burbles nearby. You walk slowly, like someone leaving a room full of thinkers you'll never quite meet again. As you round the corner, you feel it, that odd shift. You've crossed from philosophy back into practice. No more figs, no more poems. Just sunlight and a narrow path, and somewhere far off the faint clink of garden shears. But don't worry, the fig tree remembers you, and so does the wind. You smell it then before you see it. A sharp tang in the air, earthy sour, and a little rude. You wrinkle your nose, but something about the smell makes you smile. Because while it might not be elegant, it is undeniably alive. You've entered the compost zone. Don't laugh. This is the beating, steaming, fly-bothered heart of the Abbasid garden, the place where rot becomes renewal, where the empire's luxury is fed by its leftovers. And tonight you're about to learn the dirty secret behind paradise. There's a low stone wall of a head waist high, and just behind it heaps. Glorious heaps. Piles of trimmings, peels, shredded leaves, spoiled fruit feathers, straw. And yes, dung. Lots of dung. You step closer. There's camel dung, which gives slow, enduring heat. Donkey dung, which is easy to transport and breaks down fast. Goat pellets prized for their dryness. And in rare cases, crocodile dung imported from Egypt and used in tiny, near-reverent amounts for specific herbs. Was it effective? Maybe. Was it ritualistic? Absolutely. Historians still argue whether the use of crocodile dung was symbolic or pseudoscientific. A few ancient texts refer to its sun-heating properties, but others dismiss it as a superstition of the Delta folk. Still, someone somewhere carted it over desert and river to be spread among colorful carrot patches. That's commitment. You move slowly along the compost wall. It's warm here. Not just because of the morning sun, these piles generate heat as they break down. You kneel and brush a hand over the surface. Steam curls up soft and gray. There's a method to the madness. Abbasid gardeners layered their compost straw first, then manure, then scraps, then ash or lime to balance the acidity. Water was added, sometimes even scented water, yes, really to manage the smell. Not for guests. For the compost itself. A happy compost is a productive compost, or so one gardener once wrote in a margin. Nearby stands a man in a faded tunic. He's lifting a basket of onion skins and crushed almonds into the heap. His hands are stained. He whistles tunelessly, and for a moment you think this is the real alchemy. Not gold from lead, but roses from rot. You follow a narrow path leading away from the compost wall toward what looks like an experimental plot. And indeed it's marked off with low stones, each quadrant labeled with a worn clay tablet. You kneel and read the first ash only, the second ash, plus dung, the third peels, plus straw. A tiny lab in dirt. Someone long ago was testing combinations. A parchment tacked to a tree nearby flutters in the wind. It's a list, barely legible. But you catch phrases like mint yellowing after third composting and saffron prefers ash-heavy mix. It's strange. These notes feel intimate, not meant for rulers or scholars, but for future hands. A way of whispering across time. Here's what worked. Try this. Avoid that. Trust me. One scroll, preserved in a damaged archive in Mosul, even contains a compost calendar, a guide to how compost should be stirred, watered and rested depending on moon phases and planetary motion. Lunar composting, still practiced today in some places. Back then, it was part science, part divination, part habit passed down without explanation. You stop now at a rectangular bed where melon vines sprawl like lazy snakes. The soil here is darker, richer, a sign of something fed and cared for. A single melon hangs from a trellis, pale green stripe dusted with morning dew. You bend and sniff the air near it. It smells faintly like honey and wet leaves. And here's where the story gets weirder. Abbasid gardeners spoke to their melons. Not just in metaphor, literally. Quiet words. Recitations of verse. Even jokes. One gardener, known only as Abbasid bin Zayd, was rumored to recite riddles to his melons, claiming the laughter helped them grow plump. Were the melons amused? Unclear, but they were enormous. You walk further, The smell here is heavier again, compost turning being carried. A donkey brays softly in the distance. A wheelbarrow creaks past pushed by a boy with dust on his knees and sunlight in his curls. He nods at you without stopping. No one speaks much in this part of the garden. Not out of reverence, out of effort. This is labor. Smelly, honest, essential labor. And yet it's wrapped in ritual. Even dung gets sorted. Even scraps are honored. Nothing wasted. Everything transformed. You pause at a corner where a series of clay pots sit half buried in the ground. Each has a lid. Curious, you lift one. Inside, tea leaves. The next, fish bones. The third, crushed pomegranate peel. This is selective composting. Each ingredient reserved for specific use. Tea leaves to cool the soil around basil. Fish bones to strengthen fig trees. Pomegranate peel to discourage soil pests. It's not just intuitive, it's surgical. There's a fringe belief that certain plants remember their soil. That if a patch once grew mint, anything grown there afterward would take on a hint of its taste. No scientific basis. But Abbasid gardeners swore by it. That's why compost recipes were rotated carefully. Why plots were rested with lavender one season and flooded the next. You turn one last corner and find a fountain tiny, nearly hidden, bubbling over a pile of crushed apricot pits and saffron stems. A sign above it reads, "Even the husk is holy." You sit beside it. You close your eyes. The scent of rot is still there. But so is jasmine. So is lemon balm. So is something sweeter. Maybe clover. Maybe memory. It's hard to say where the compost ends and the beauty begins. And maybe that's the point. And maybe you stretch your legs a little and drift away from the compost zone, relieved to leave behind the earthy funk, but oddly nostalgic too. That quiet place of transformation still lingers on your skin like a whisper of ash and basil. But now you follow the sound of running water again, softer this time. Not the roar of fountains or the creak of norias. It's the hush of channels curving beneath stone, reappearing in the sun, then disappearing again like shy rivulets. You arrive at a long, narrow garden enclosed on three sides, the fourth open to a view of the distant Tigris. And everywhere here, water. You're in the perfumed aqueduct court. At first glance, it looks like another ornamental space, mosaic walkways, shaded pomegranate trees, clay benches, worn smooth from centuries of lounging. But then you catch the scent roses. Real ones. And not from the bushes beside you. It's the water itself. You kneel beside a small channel, no wider than your palm, and lean closer. The scent rises rosewater. Faint but unmistakable. The water is clear cool and just a little oily on the surface. You touch it to your wrist. The Abbasids didn't just admire flowers, they distilled them, watered with them, bathed in them, even irrigated select sections of the garden with perfume drawn off from rose oil production. It wasn't just about luxury, it was also deeply symbolic. Scent carried spiritual weight. Rosewater cleansed both body and space. Some believed it helped align the soul. Others thought it lulled the jinn to sleep. Whatever the motive, the result was unforgettable water that smelled like poetry. You follow the channel to its origin, a raised clay cistern, painted with faded vines and birds. Inside you spot rose petals still drifting lazily on the surface. Beyond it, three women tend a copper steel steam rising into the early air, dripping slowly into a glass jar perched like treasure under a spout. These women don't speak. One stirs a basin of rose petals with a long wooden pedal. Another checks the temperature of the copper coil with her knuckle. The third holds a cloth over her nose, not from offense but from reverence. This is not perfume. This is something older, quieter. There's a fringe belief recorded in one 10th century text that rosewater vapor could soften the voice and calm disobedient children. We leave that one untested. But what's undeniable is how much value the Abbasids place on scent. The perfume industry anchored in gardens like this was massive. Fragrant oils were exported to India, China, North Africa, and even the Frankish courts. Some historians even claim that Baghdad's rosewater was more valuable ounce for ounce than silver. You sit beneath an arbor heavy with trailing grapevines. Nearby, small jars rest on a stone table, each corked and labeled in careful script: orange blossom, myrtle, lavender, musk, saffron, and simply night flowers. You don't dare open that one. A gardener approaches a channel with a small funnel, pouring in a thin stream of lavender water. He waits, watches, then nods. The scented water disappears into the irrigation path destined for a row of young lemon trees. Why lemon? According to an old garden manual, lemon trees swell in joy when given the tears of flowers. Yes, that's how they described it. You walk on, passing a shaded walkway where scrolls once hung to dry. Ink in the Abbasid period was often mixed with plant extracts, walnut, indigo, myrrh. Some perfumes doubled as fixatives for documents, meaning a poem written in a garden might smell like one even centuries later. You pause at a marble basin, low and wide, filled with still water and ringed with petals. A woman nearby is dipping cloth into the basin linen, it looks like, then wringing it gently. She stretches it over a wooden frame in the sun. Sunlight catches in the fibers. A warm breeze carries the scent of rose and sun-warmed cotton. You ask yourself something, quietly, was this practical, spiritual, or purely indulgent? And the answer is yes. In Abbasid culture, nothing existed for just one reason. A flower was a decoration, an offering, a medicine, a metaphor, and when steeped just right, a blessing that could drift on water and linger in your dreams. Historians still argue whether the use of scented irrigation had measurable botanical benefits. Did basil really grow faster under rosewater? Did orange blossoms thrive in perfumed mist? Some experiments in modern agro-perfumery suggest that certain oils can indeed affect pest behavior and soil microbes. But the Abbasids weren't measuring pH levels. They were listening, watching, sensing. They were feeling their way through. You round the corner into a space of silence. No flowers here, just stone channels, some dry, some gently trickling. This is the bones of the garden, the infrastructure. Beneath the beauty lies engineering. The Abbasid system of qanats. Those underground aqueducts fed everything here. Cool water drawn from distant hills, or ancient wells flowing by gravity alone. You spot a discreet grate in the floor. Kneel beside it. A soft rush echoes from deep below. The water here hasn't seen sunlight in days. It doesn't need to. It knows where it's going. And above it all, the scent of rose. A note on the wall reads, "If you walk with patience, even the water will perfume your path." You take a step, and another, and in your wake a shimmer. You don't look back. You pause at a bend in the path, and something shifts. Not the air, not the light, but something quieter. A sensation that someone else was just here, that something important happened. You round a wall covered in climbing jasmine and enter a tucked-away grove, shaded and calm. It feels ceremonial. There are no grand fountains here, no mosaic paths or rare birds, just rows of tidy beds, some newly turned, others left undisturbed. At the center, a slab of stone worn, smooth by generations of hands, and resting atop it a calendar, but not like the ones you know. No dates, no numbered months, just symbols. You kneel beside it, tracing the lines carved into the surface, a moon sliver, a single droplet, a three-leaf shape, something that looks like a feather caught in wind. It's cryptic, elegant, and strangely hypnotic. This, you realize, is the hidden calendar of the Abbasid gardeners. Not the official calendar, none of the royal ones with holidays and military campaigns. This one is older, closer to the soil. A calendar of shadows and scents, of moon phases, dew points, and bee activity. Each mark signifies a moment to sow, to cut, to graft. Not by date, but by feeling. You dig your fingers into the earth beside the stone, and it's soft like a sponge left out on the spring rain. Maybe today is for basil, or maybe for rest. Abbasid gardens weren't just managed, they were watched. Gardeners didn't simply work the land, they read it. They studied the way dew formed on fig leaves, the angle of early light on orange trees, the number of night moths circling the jasmine. If a scent changed even slightly, it might signal a coming drought or a need to harvest early. Historians still argue whether these moon phase calendars were widespread or just localized folklore. Few survived, and most were oral, passed down by whisper, gesture, and ritual. Some say each garden had its own code.
Others believe a master calendar existed hidden deep in the house of wisdom, encoded to protect it from misuse. You rise and walk deeper into the grove. Along the path, you begin to notice more of its marks etched into stones, carved into tree trunks, even embroidered into faded cloths nailed to garden posts. This is a language, a system, not of numbers, but of observations. You stop beside a mulberry tree. Its leaves are heavy, drooping. Beneath it, a shallow dish holds a clump of honeycomb. Ants swarm it now, but the scent lingers, wildflower heat and sugar. You remember an old anecdote: when ants arrived 3 days early to the honey dish, it meant the monsoon would be late. Whether or not that was true didn't matter. The garden believed it. A little farther, you come upon a circular bed ringed with smooth river stones. In its center, a single rose bush, perfectly pruned. And beside it, a small wooden bowl filled with water, no wine, or something thicker, saffron tinted. You sniff, fermented fig and rose, a ritual perhaps, or an offering, maybe to the plant, maybe to the moon, maybe to whoever kept the calendar balanced. You sit down on the edge of the bed and remember something else you read. Abbasid gardens weren't just measured in beauty, they were judged by timing. To prune too early was a sin. To sow after the right sign had passed, wasteful, disrespectful. Entire garden teams could be replaced if they missed a key lunar signal. And here's a quirky one. There was a rule in one household that no mint could be harvested until 3 cats had walked through the patch after sunset. No one remembers why. But the gardeners obeyed it. Year after year. You glance up and wouldn't you know it? A cat appears. Not 3, just 1. Slim gray with a crescent of white above its eye. It passes you with a look that could either be disdain or approval, and disappears behind a wall of hibiscus. You smile. Coincidence, sure. But you wait anyway. A second cat appears, then a third, all silent, all perfectly timed. You can't help but laugh softly to yourself, not out of disbelief, but out of deep, almost reverent joy. This garden doesn't just bloom, it knows things. You rise and begin to walk again, following small flags strung between olive trees. On each flag, a symbol, a curl, a mark. Perhaps one says, "Today is good for planting onions." Another might mean, "Avoid cutting fig branches until the next full moon." And just beyond the flags, a gardener stands with a bowl of seeds. She watches the sky, not the sun, but the light on the underside of the leaves. She whispers something, then drops the seeds into the soil gently, as if tucking in a child.
You don't ask what she said. You already know the answer. She was speaking to the calendar. Not the one on your wall. The one that lives in root and wind and cat paw prints and moonlight on lemon bark. The one that never gets printed.
Only passed down. You follow the grove's path until it forks one side bright with sunlight and orange blossoms, the other shaded overhung with palms. Of course, you choose the shed. You've learned by now in Abbasid gardens the interesting things don't shout. They whisper. And this next garden corner whispers with danger. You slow your steps. The air here is cooler, the light slatted. Tall date palms rise like columns, their fronds trembling just slightly, in a wind you don't feel elsewhere. And between their trunks walls, low vine draped, seemingly innocent. But behind those walls, secrets. Because this isn't just a fruit grove, it's a listening post. Welcome to the quiet world of espionage among the date palms. It sounds like a fable, doesn't it? But during the golden age of the Abbasid Caliphate, even the gardens had ears. You crouch near a shallow channel running through the grove. Its water runs slow and clear. Almost too clear. Someone has scattered petals across its surface, not for beauty, but to mark movement. Petals drifting too fast, someone's walking upstream. Petals gone missing, someone's disturbed the channel. It's genius, really. Garden paths make ideal surveillance routes. They're scenic quiet and never questioned. Courtiers stroll, servants pass, gardeners work. All of them talk, and some of them listen. You move quietly beneath an overhang of palm leaves. To your right, a wooden bench with a cushion still bearing the faint imprint of someone recently seated. And on that cushion, a lemon. Perfectly round, untouched. A signal. In some palaces, placing a citrus fruit on a bench was code this spot has ears. Talk elsewhere. Historians still argue whether Abbasid gardens were systematically used for spying or just occasionally co-opted for such things. Some say garden walls were designed with intentional acoustic flaws, echo chambers to amplify whispers. Others claim this is retroactive romanticizing. But you crouch near a corner of stone and whisper a test word, basil. It carries farther than you expect, farther than it should. You stand and step into a clearing. Two gardeners are tending to a fig tree, or at least pretending to. Their tools are idle, their hands still. One scratches his head while glancing toward the palace wall. The other leans in, slightly nods. One then moves along. It's subtle, choreographed, and familiar in that way only practiced routines are. You wonder what's being passed here. Not objects information. A rumor about a minister's loyalty. A visitor who stayed longer than scheduled. A slip of tongue over breakfast. In the Abbasid world, such things traveled faster than horses, and were better to whisper them than a garden. This corner of the grove is oddly symmetrical. Rows of palms form tight corridors. At the far end, a narrow doorway leads into a shaded arcade, a common passage between garden and harem, or between garden and council chamber. You step inside. The acoustics change instantly. It's cooler here, and every footstep returns to you with an odd softness. A short bench rests against the wall. It's worn, grooved, clearly well used. You sit and immediately feel it the perfect position to overhear anything said on the path just outside. Not see mind, you just hear. There's even a small niche beside the bench cut into the stone. Just large enough for a rolled parchment. Empty now. But you imagine what's passed through here: poems, love notes, threats, confessions. All under the cover of leaf and petal. You recall a fringe story never proven that one Abbasid vizier trained a squad of gardeners to act as informants.
Their tools were dual-purpose pruning shears and message scrapers. Their watering cans sometimes carried ink. Their seed pouches contained more than seeds.
The group was called Samir al-Nakul, the Date Palm Companions. No official record of them exists, but the legend persists. You emerge from the arcade into another patch of light. Here, citrus trees grow in neat lines. A gardener nearby speaks softly to a boy, correcting his grip on a watering jug, but their eyes flicker toward you. Once, then away. A metal ball sits on a ledge beside you. You look inside. Lemons again. One whole. One halved. One rotting. A gobe. The Caliph's corp was infamous for code ciphers and layered messages. Some say a rotting lemon meant disgrace is near. A halved one meant a deal is broken. A whole one speak freely. You step back. Whatever this message meant, it wasn't for you. And yet, it's impossible not to feel watched now. Not menacingly. Not like you're in danger. But like you've entered a room where conversation just stopped. And the silence is doing the talking. You stroll toward the far wall, where vines climb high, twisting into knots. As you run your hand along one, you find something wedged behind the rock, a thin sliver of carved wood. On it, a single word, Grib Garib. Stranger. Not threatening, just noting. You let it go. The date palms rustle. A peacock cries in the distance, far too late in the day to be doing so, which might mean someone's coming. Or that it saw something it shouldn't have. Or that it's just a peacock and doesn't care about your tension. Still, you decide to move on. Because in this garden, every fruit has meaning. Every footstep leaves a trace. And every whisper, no matter how soft, is never quite alone. The tension lingers as you leave the date palms behind. But the garden seems to notice. The shadows soften, the scent of orange blossom returns, and a light breeze lifts the edges of your robe. You've left the listening groves. Now you step into a space that hums with a different kind of energy. You're in the healing quadrant. Everything here is intentional. The trees are shorter, their fruit within easy reach. The beds are raised not for show, but so no one has to kneel too far. The air smells sharper, medicinal. Not unpleasant, just aware. A gentle clinking draws your eye to the center of the courtyard, where a wooden frame supports bundles of drying herbs. Rosemary, thyme, rue, mint sage, and something pale and thread-like, perhaps saffron. A boy carefully flips the bundles with a wooden rod, ensuring even exposure to the rising sun. He hums quietly. Not a song. A rhythm. Maybe something his teacher taught him to keep the timing right. Because timing matters here more than anywhere. The Abbasids were not just gardeners. They were early pharmacologists. Their gardens were hospitals, and their hospitals were gardens. The great Bimaristan hospitals, built in Baghdad and beyond, were often surrounded by medicinal plots. Why? Because fresh herbs lost potency quickly. If you needed hyssop for a cough or willow bark for fever, you wanted it plucked minutes before use, not carted from the market. You stroll past a line of earthen jars, each set into the ground to keep cool. A small tag hangs from one crushed fenugreek for swelling, another dried myrtle. Inhale before sleep. A man with grey streaked hair is seated beneath an olive tree, slowly grinding dried bark in a marble mortar. He works in circles, patient but barely noticing you. He's not a doctor, not exactly. He's a Rawi, a rememberer, a kind of oral pharmacist, trained not in books, but in the stories behind the cures. Historians still argue whether Abbasid medicine leaned more on Greek texts or folk knowledge. The reality, it was both. Galen and Hippocrates filtered through Persian tradition and local superstition, What mattered wasn't where the cure came from, but whether it worked. You pause at a tiled fountain shaped like a leaf. The water trickles through channels lined with thyme and marigold. A physician once wrote that water passed over marigold leaves carries the memory of the sun. Was he serious? Maybe not. But he still prescribed it for melancholia. Further down, a section of the garden has been cordoned off with lattice fencing. Inside are plants less lovely, brickly, pale, twisted. This is the danger zone. One tag reads henbane, do not touch. Another nightshade, handle with cloth. A third simply says, for nightmares only. You step back instinctively. There's something eerie about seeing poison growing so neatly. But it was necessary. Pain was real.
Abbasid physicians treated everything from migraines to madness, and sometimes the cure danced too close to the edge. There's a curious bush near the path, small yellow flowers, soft leaves. You lean in. Rue. The smell is complicated, bitter, sharp, astringent. The Abbasids used it for everything from warding off demons to easing stomach pain. It was also placed in shoes to cool angry feet. That last one's unverified. A few steps later, you find the opposite of menace, a bed of chamomile delicate and friendly. Bees hum gently among the blooms. Beside it a note carved into wood. Give to widows the lonely and those who cannot sleep. You touch the edge of a leaf and feel something like kindness radiating back. The path leads now to a small tiled alcove, and within it a low table holding scrolls wrapped in cloth. You unfold one. Inside diagrams of the body, not just bones and muscles, but overlays of scent, taste, color. One figure is surrounded by plants like guardians.
Another shows a person inhaling steam from a clay pot. This is therapy by aroma. The Abbasids believed deeply in scent as medicine. Lavender for grief, rose for confusion, basil for clarity. Even bitter smells like garlic or vinegar had their place. One manual recommends warming sesame oil, mixing it with crushed mint, and massaging it into the scalp to drive away thoughts that loop like flies. You pause. That actually sounds useful. In a shady corner of the garden, you find what might be its most human detail, a bench carved with names. Faded, yes. But there, some in Arabic, some in Persian, one in Greek. A visitor once wrote that patients who recovered in the garden were allowed to inscribe their names before they left. A quiet ritual, no plaques, no ceremonies. Just a name and the scent of rosemary on the breeze. You sit on the bench. Breathe. For a moment it feels like the garden breathes with you. A pause in time. A sigh. The awareness that something ancient and gentle has passed through your life without demanding anything back. The wind carries the scent of fennel. Somewhere behind you, someone coughs. Not harshly, just a reminder. The garden isn't done yet. You rise slowly, step out of the healing quadrant, and carry a little of its peace with you. You walk for some time without a plan, letting the garden lead. There's no path here that insists, it all just gently invites. A low stone wall runs beside you now, and over it climbs a vine with pale yellow flowers and curling tendrils. A soft breeze lifts the scent, something between honey and melon. You stop in your tracks. A melon. Not just any melon. The striped melon of Samara. You've heard whispers of it already in the poems, the garden scrolls, even the silly songs children sing in the market. A fruit so perfectly balanced sweetness, acidity, fragrance, that it supposedly brought a caliph to tears and a poet to silence. The fruit that was offered only to foreign dignitaries, so they taste what heaven exports. The path narrows, and soon you find yourself before a trellis heavy with hanging orbs.
melons the size of small pillows, some streaked with dark green, others pale and almost glowing in the dappled sunlight. A gardener nearby is checking each one, not squeezing, not tapping, but listening. He cradles a melon in his hands, like an infant brings it to his ear and listens, then moves on to the next. You lean in. He murmurs almost to himself, not today, maybe after the second moon's blush. What does that even mean? He's gone before you can ask. The Abbasid melon, sometimes called shamam, was more than fruit. It was fame. The caliphs competed not just in poetry and scholarship, but in agriculture. Which palace could produce the largest melon, the most fragrant, the one with skin so thin it peeled itself? There are fringe records, half myth, half brag of caliphs, holding blind tastings with dozens of melon varieties. One document claims a vizier once bribed a gardener from Basra to share a seed strain said to grow melons with flesh like the heart of paradise and scent that awakens the dull. Historians still argue whether this legendary melon was truly unique or simply the result of exceptional irrigation and marketing flair. But then again, you're standing in front of it now, and it smells like a perfume shop inside a summer dream. A bench waits nearby under an overhang of vines. You sit, and as you do, a small notebook falls to the ground. It's been wedged between the slats. The leather is cracked, the pages water-warped. You open it. Inside, scrawled in a mixture of Arabic and garden shorthand, are melon notes. Too sweet, add ash to soil. Bloom early, flavor flat, wait one more moon. Samara seed number 3, scent holds after cutting. And this one with stars beside it, guest from Nishapur cried. Said it reminded him of youth. Gave seed to wife in secret. You close the book gently. You don't know whose hands wrote this, but you know they mattered. Because melons in this garden were legacy. You rise and move deeper into the patch. The vines wind low, but between them are carefully placed clay balls, filled with what looks like ash pebbles and even rose petals. Soil amendments, scent infusions. You don't ask, you just breathe it in. A parchment tacked to a nearby date palm reads, "We don't grow melons, we grow memory." It hits you harder than it should, because that's what this place really is, isn't it? Not just petals and fountains and whispers. It's memory. Curated. Watered. Eaten. You pass a small shed. Inside rows of drying seeds, each on its own cloth labeled with a mix of numbers and verse. You read one aloud, seed 19. Tastes of dusk and grandfather's voice. Another seed 44. Not sweet but brave. You hear laughter behind you. 2 girls walk by, each holding half a melon. They chew thoughtfully, then swap. One grimaces. The other laughs. They vanish around the corner. You catch a piece of rind discarded near the vine and lift it to your face. The scent is unreal cucumber honey, something almost floral. You press your thumb to its green striped skin. It's smooth, waxy, cool. You imagine the first person to plant this seed. Maybe a runaway slave, maybe a bored scholar, maybe a woman with a small patch of land and too much silence. Whoever it was, they touched sweetness, and the sweetness outlived them. That's the point of a garden, isn't it? Not to feed you today, but to feed someone's joy after you. The wind stirs the vines. A melon drops. You don't catch it in time, but you kneel beside it, watch the split skin reveal a glistening center orange and wild. You don't need to taste it to understand. It's perfect. You stand from the fallen melon, slowly wiping your hands on your robe. But there's something different in your chest now. Like you've been given something precious and quiet. A story in taste, form, a softness with weight. You follow the winding path, its gravel half swallowed by creeping herbs, and it leads you somewhere unexpected. A small wooden gate. Nothing grand, just slats of cedar tied together with dried vine. But the latch is unhooked. And beyond it, a smaller garden. Not hidden, not locked, just private. And as you step through, the air changes. Softer. Cooler. And there among the palms and basil is a figure. A woman. Kneeling beside a row of mint. Hands deep in the soil. Hair tucked beneath a dark scarf. She doesn't see you. Or maybe she does, but chooses not to react. Because this is her garden. And you're a guest in it. You take another step. She hums a tune with no name, the kind that makes time slow down. Around her, everything is meticulous.
Beds lined with polished stones, shaded plants pruned precisely, a trellis woven with sweet pea vines. You notice something else. The layout is different from the other gardens. The beds aren't in quadrants, but crescents, arcs that spiral toward a fountain at the center shaped like a simple bowl. No lion mouths, no calligraphy, just water. Clear. Still. This is not for display. This is cultivation with intention. And that's when it clicks. You found one of them. The women who gardened in disguise. Officially, Abbasid court gardens were a man's world designed by men, overseen by men, maintained by men. But behind the curtains in shaded corners and private plots, women dug, sowed, and harvested. Historians still argue how involved women truly were in Abbasid horticulture. Some say they were limited to household herbs. Others insist women, especially educated ones, ran entire estates, albeit invisibly. What's known, a few scrolls survive, signed only with initials or honorifics detailing advanced botanical knowledge that could have only come from lived experience. You step closer. The woman pauses. Her work glances at you, once then returns to her mint. Her face is calm. Tired, maybe, but steady. She touches the soil as if it speaks back. Nearby, a shelf of clay jars, some labeled in delicate writing, sumac for sourness, hyssop for lung heat, sage boil only with clean thoughts. You pass a small window set into a mud brick wall. Just inside a shelf of notebooks, not many, but enough to hold a life's worth of weather charts, pest observations, pruning notes. On the cover of one, a single word, could. Self. This garden is not about power or prestige. It's about ownership. A woman shaping the world under her own fingers, even if no one sees it. You walk past a patch of coriander already flowering, and notice the rows are staggered, not sloppy, but deliberate. Designed to catch morning light just right. She's not following the quadrants. She's correcting them. There's a basin set into the ground near a cluster of young date saplings. You kneel and peer inside. Reflected in the water is the sky, and just barely the outline of the vines overhead. But scratched faintly into the stone rim of the basin are initials. Dozens of them. Some crossed out, others circled. Beneath them, a symbol, the crescent moon, with a leaf beneath it. It's a signature. Or maybe a guild. A society of women who left no names but left each other signs. You sit on the edge of the basin and close your eyes. You remember a line from a fringe document once banned, now barely remembered. It said, "Where a woman plants mint, listen closely, she's telling a truth no scroll can hold." You open your eyes. And there she is again, still tending the mint. But now her eyes meet yours. She doesn't speak. Doesn't need to. She just nods. And with that you stand. Not to leave. Just to walk slowly around the edges of her world. There's a pomegranate tree at the far end, fruit not quite ripe. Beneath it, a circle of flat stones. A seat, a shrine, a meeting place. In the center, a dish of honey and sesame. An offering, perhaps, to bees, to memory, or to the quiet power that grows when no one's watching. You trail your fingers across the bark of the tree, rough and warm, and then you step back through the gate. You don't latch it.
That kind of door wasn't meant to close. The path pulls you forward, but now there's a hush in your step. After the hidden garden of the unnamed woman, even the trees seem to move differently, gentler, as if they're aware you've seen something you weren't supposed to, or maybe just something rarely allowed. But what's next is not secret. It's science. You emerge into an open court, dazzlingly symmetrical, flooded with sunlight and perfectly still. The kind of stillness you only notice after silence. At its center, a shallow reflecting pool. And flanking that pool, curved stone benches shaded by trellises of creeping ivy. But the real wonder here is the air. It moves, but not wildly, not randomly. It moves with direction brushed toward you in a steady whispering breeze that makes your robe flutter, lifts the scent of citrus from your sleeve, and cools your brow exactly where the heat had started to settle. You step back, then forward again. It's not your imagination. The wind is designed. This is one of the Abbasid marvels, the art of taming the wind. They didn't use fans, no machines, no magic, just architecture, geometry, and plants. You walk along the edge of the court. Every tree is placed not for beauty, but for thermodynamics. Tall date palms rise on the sunniest side, absorbing heat in the upper canopy. Beneath them, denser citrus trees. Lower still herbs with high moisture content, mint basil, lemon balm plants that sweat releasing moisture as the wind passes. And then fountains. Not for noise, not for splashing, but for evaporation. As air moves through the garden, it's funneled past these water sources. The warm air picks up, moisture cools slightly, and drifts guided by trellises and vine walls right where the garden wants it to go. You stand still, feel it hit your neck. Cool, persistent, like the garden is breathing on you. Historians still debate whether Abbasid wine design was intentional from the start or evolved through trial and genius error. But texts survive describing the art of shade and the paths of gentle air. One architect wrote, "Wind is not hunted, it is invited." You take a seat on one of the stone benches and look upward. The trellis above you is layered in grapevines, and above that thin slats of polished cedar arranged to catch the morning sun, but block the noon blaze. Shafts of golden light slice the space around you like sculpture. And here's the twist, nothing here is permanent. The wind changes with the seasons. So does the shade. So do the plants. This garden is fluid. In spring, the trellises hold blooming wisteria. In summer, broad-leafed gourds. In fall, the vines are trimmed back to let in warmth. The benches too are movable. Slats on wheels. Cushions replaced depending on sun angle and wind chill. And below your feet, a hidden channel. No wider than your palm, but deep carved into the marble and filled with water just barely moving. Some say it's connected to the palace aqueduct. Others claim it runs only beneath the wind garden. Either way, it breathes cool into the stone itself. There's a quirky passage in one manuscript, half practical, half poetry, that reads, "He who sits with feet on the whispering floor shall find no sweat, even in July." You test it. It's true. Your feet feel cooler. You take a deep breath. It smells like jasmine, but not strong. Just enough to notice. Just enough to ease. You follow the breeze toward a curved alcove. There against the far wall is what looks like a wide clay vase, but it's not for flowers. A hole in its top, another at its base. The air passing through it hums softly. It's a salsa bill, a passive cooling device. As wind moves past water inside, it slows, cools, then spills into the courtyard like a whisper. You crouch beside it. Touch the clay. It's cool. Condensation beats at the edge. Someone has etched a line around the rim in calligraphy. The wind is wise. Let it speak. You smile. Someone understood. You step out again and notice something subtle. The wind is gone. Now it's redirected toward another bench, another guest, another time of day. The garden has moved on, and so do you. But before you go, you look back at the way the vines sway, at the curve of air over stone, at the quiet miracle of being cooler without knowing why. Because this isn't just design, this is elegance, invisible, intentional, and softly relentless, just like the wind. The garden lulls you, now scented breezes, quiet footsteps, birds half-heartedly fussing in the fig trees. You think you've seen the best of it, the elegance, the structure, the secrets, but no Abbasid story would be complete without a touch of disaster. And you find it unexpectedly around a corner marked by scorched stone and a lingering scent that isn't floral, isn't herbal, but something older, something charred. You've stepped into the memory of the garden that had burned down twice. At first it doesn't look like a ruin. There's life here, young trees, fresh soil, clay pots stacked neatly. But the signs are there if you look: stones blackened beneath vines, gaps in the pergola where charred beams have been replaced, and a rectangular patch where the soil is darker too, rich, almost suspiciously fertile. This was once the pride of a caliph, Al-Mutamid, if you trust the poets. A garden designed not just for beauty, but for excess layers upon layers of rare plants, imported soils. Peacocks dyed with saffron, yes, dyed, and a night blooming water, lily rumored to sing when the moonlight struck it. Historians still argue if the singing lily ever existed. Some say it was a trick of wind and water. Others insist it was just a poet's hallucination after too much fermented mulberry wine. But everyone agrees the garden was infamous. Too infamous. You find a bench cracked by heat, but still warm in the morning sun. Beside it, a half-buried ceramic marker reads, "It burned for 3 days, but only after he lit it himself." Wait, what? You dig a little metaphorically. The first fire, they say, was accidental, a candle left unattended during a nighttime poetry gathering. Wind caught a curtain flame, leapt to the trellis, and before dawn, the garden was gone. Some vines survived. One apricot tree, half scorched, bore fruit again the following year. It was declared a blessed survivor, and its seeds were spread across the Caliphate. You pass one of its children now, a gnarled little thing with new shoots. A tag reads, "Apricot 4th generation, fire line." But the second fire, that was no accident. Legend has it that after the garden was rebuilt, more lavish than before, with new fountains and rare Chinese plum trees, the Caliph grew dissatisfied. He claimed the spirit of the old garden was missing. The fragrance had changed. The wind was disobedient. The melon patch refused to fruit. So one night, wrapped in silk robes and surrounded by silent attendants, he walked through the garden with a lantern, dipped a branch into the flame, touched it to the jasmine, and walked away. The fire spread slow, deliberate, like a ritual. By dawn it was ash again. That story might be apocryphal. Fringe sources suggest the second fire was actually sabotage rivals. In court insulted poets, even a jealous vizier whose own garden received less praise. But the symbolism stuck. You step over a cracked tile and notice a line scratched into its surface. He preferred the smoke to the silence. It hits harder than you expect. You imagine that night. The fire, the watchers, the silence. The Caliph standing still, eyes wet, not from grief maybe, but from the smoke. from what he knew he'd never get back. Because a garden once burned can be rebuilt, but never repeated. You move past what remains of the central fountain. Its basin still intact but chipped. Someone has filled it with soil and planted thyme. Not to reclaim the space, just to acknowledge it. The scent is earthy, sharp, rooted. Around the edges of this scarred quadrant, new life blooms carefully chosen. Nothing too delicate, nothing too demanding. You see lemongrass, rosemary, drought, hardy hibiscus. A tree tucked as phoenix palm, from fire again. You sit on the edge of the basin, fingers tracing the scorched stone. And you think maybe the Caliph wasn't mad. Maybe he wasn't spoiled or cruel. Maybe he understood something. That no matter how lush a garden is, how fragrant, how perfect, there's something in us that sometimes wants to reset. To reduce it all to black and start from dust. You look up. The vines have started to climb again. Not aggressively. Just patiently. As if they too remember the flames. And have decided to forgive. You rise and walk the perimeter of this fire-scarred space. It doesn't feel tragic. It feels honest. And it leaves you with this thought. Some parts of the garden exist not to grow, but to remind you what happens when you love something too much. The burned garden fades behind you, like a story someone once told too quietly. You carry its scent, steel rosemary, smoke something scorched but pure. And now, as you follow a cobbled path, lined with low citrus shrubs, the mood shifts again. Subtly, sharply, because ahead of you beneath a canopy of pomegranate trees sits a pavilion. Simple, circular, surrounded by rows of young fruit trees not yet bearing. At its center, a single polished stone table. On the table, a bowl. Inside the bowl, pomegranate, just one. Whole, gleaming, as if placed with intention. And this is how you know you've entered the realm of pomegranate politics. Sounds like a joke. It isn't. In the Abbasid court, where metaphors carried more weight than metals, the pomegranate was more than fruit. It was a symbol, a message, sometimes a warning. You sit slowly on a cushioned bench near the table. The air is dense here, not in temperature, but in meaning. You look at the fruit, perfectly round. Its rind unblemished, a deep burnished red. You don't touch it. You don't need to. It's saying plenty. There's a fringe theory traced back to a court scroll that the type of pomegranate served at a diplomatic feast signaled the caliph's mood toward the guest. Red and sour. He was displeased. Pale and sweet. Open to negotiation. Split before serving. He wanted division. And if the fruit never arrived, well, then someone was no longer considered useful. Historians still argue whether these rituals were codified or just beautifully coincidental. But the scrolls describe entire diplomatic episodes where the wrong pomegranate caused the right chaos. One scribe recounts an ambassador from Sogdia nearly losing his head after laughing at the sourness of a gift. The next morning he was sent home. Some say with a seed packet as an insult. Others say he was made into compost. It varies. You step beyond the pavilion into the orchard. The trees are young here, knees-high pomegranate saplings, each staked and tagged. Some are thriving, others wither at the edges. One is bent sharply, its trunk split and wrapped with cloth. A gardener kneels beside it, murmuring, not cursing, apologizing. You recognize the tone. It's not just a tree, it's a statement. In the Abbasid court, plants carried more than perfume, they carried intent, which is why gifts of fruit were so loaded. A cluster of grapes might be affection, a basket of dates respect, but a pomegranate that was layered. Its seeds were order, its bitterness truth, its color passion, its toughness warning. You find a scroll tucked between two garden walls. The ink is faded but legible. When the pomegranate is served whole, beware. When sliced, there is hope. When juiced, someone already bleeds. Poetry. Sure, but also policy. You pass an older tree, now branches reaching low, fruit heavy. One has split on the limb, burst open from ripeness or neglect.
You step closer. Inside, hundreds of ruby seeds glistening, and carved into the bark beneath it the word Qadar, destiny. You sit beneath this tree. No one else is around. The sun filters through the leaves in the pulse, and somewhere nearby, water trickles in a thin, half-hearted fountain. It's quiet, and you think about the men and women who sent messages through fruit, who negotiated truces over pomegranate wine, who lost favor when their trees died. One record, half rumor, half oath, speaks of a vizier whose orchard was razed after a failed rebellion. But the Caliph let one tree stand, a pomegranate planted by the vizier's daughter. It was untouched. 3 years later, when the daughter returned, the tree bore its first fruit. The Caliph gave it to her by hand. Forgiveness. Or maybe just a symbol of it. You rise and begin to walk the orchard's edge, where an elderly gardener trims the lower branches of a sapling. He doesn't return it, just gestures toward the table. The single pomegranate still raised there untouched. You ask him softly, "What does it mean?" He smiles and says, "Depends who you think it's for," then walks away. You remain there a while, watching the breeze move the tree leaves, the weight of the fruit, the light on the seeds, and in the quiet something settles. Because here in this garden nothing is just what it is, especially a pomegranate. You leave the orchard slower than you arrived. Each step feels thoughtful, intentional, like you're carrying something delicate in your hands, even though they're empty. You've passed through silence and fire, medicine and metaphor, but what waits ahead feels almost mythical. At first, it looks like nothing, just a shadowy corridor framed by low hedges and tall stone walls. No birds, no breeze. But there's a doorway, at the end half open. A soft draft goes through it, and the sand that rides that air is impossible to describe. Dry parchment, crushed fennel, maybe a whisper of lemon. You step through the doorway into a circular chamber paved with river stones, and in the center, surrounded by a ring of garden beds, is a low dome structure made of brick and tile. The dome has no windows, just a single narrow slit near the top to let in the light. This is the seed library that disappeared. You've heard mentions of it before, mostly in speculation, sometimes in fables. Some say it was a greenhouse, others a vault. A few call it a memory palace filled with seeds from every part of the Abbasid world, vines from Andalusia, spices from India, grains from Khorasan, flowers from forgotten oases. But all agree on one thing: it's gone. Burnt, looted, lost to time, no one knows. The House of Wisdom may have had maps, maybe even lists. But the seeds, the actual seeds, gone. Or maybe not. Because here you are, and the door is ajar. You step closer to the dome. The air is noticeably cooler. You push gently. The door groans but opens. Inside, no grand hall, no scrolls stacked to the ceiling. Just rows of clay pots. Small, unlabeled, lined along shelves set into the walls. The light from above spills down like a single spotlight in a theater, illuminating dust motes and silence. You take a few steps inside. Your footsteps echo faintly. Each pot contains something different. Not all of them seeds. Some hold sand, others dried leaves. One contains nothing but a folded scrap of cloth that smells like cardamom. One jar, slightly cracked, has a charcoal sketch of a grapevine on its side. Inside, what looks like tiny pebbles,
or seeds? Hard to tell. You don't touch, you just observe. There's a faded inscription on the floor, almost worn. Smooth life, if kept dry and warm, remembers its shape. You look up. Historians still argue whether a real seed vault existed during the Abbasid period. The idea seems almost modern, far ahead of its time. But there are enough mentions, enough footnotes and forgotten texts to suggest that something like it may have lived here. A place where potential was stored. Quietly, silently, waiting. You wander the room slowly. No one else is here. No guards, no gardeners. Just you and the sleeping archive of unplanted tomorrows. You pause at a pot sealed with wax. It has no writing, only a painted image, a hand extended palm up with 3 falling petals. Is it a warning? An invitation? You're not sure. There's something sacred about this space. Not in the religious sense, but in the way that libraries are sacred. Or seed pickets. Or the pause before a storm. You think about what it means to store a future you may never see. About someone in the 9th century saving a handful of seeds not for their child but for someone like you. You sit in the middle of the floor. The stone is cool. You close your eyes. You think of all the gardens you've walked through so far. The compost. The wind. The fire. The mint planted in secret. The pomegranate placed like a poem. And now the seeds. Not just ideas, but beginnings. One pot near the exit catches your eye as you stand. It's tucked low, half buried in shadow. The symbol on it is barely visible, just a faint line, a spiral. You lift it gently and hear the soft rattle of something inside. Seeds, surely. But of what there's no label, no clue. You set it back. It's not meant for you. At least not yet. You step outside. The sun is higher now, casting sharper shadows, but the world somehow feels younger. As if something that slept has shifted slightly in its dream. The door behind you creaks closed. You don't try to stop it. Let it rest. Let it keep what it knows. Because not everything that disappears is lost. Some things are waiting. You walk for a while in silence, not because the path demands it, but because your thoughts do. That domed vault, so hushed, so weighty, feels like it's still with you, echoing between your ribs. But the garden doesn't linger. It nudges gently, always forward. And before long, that silence is replaced by something very different. Laughter. Not loud, not wild, just mischievous. You follow it, ducking beneath an arch covered in ivy and honeysuckle, and step into a long corridor flanked by cypress trees. At the end of the path is a small domed chamber, open on one side, filled with cushions, and of all things perfume jars. And in the middle of this arrangement, a toppled copper vat. The scent hits you before the sight does. Roses. Crushed, overripe, borderline excessive. You found it. The rosewater heist. The story goes like this. One spring night in the court of Caliph al-Muqtadir, someone or several someones stole over 200 gallons of freshly distilled damask rose oil from the royal gardens. That's not a typo. 200 gallons. Gone. No doors broken. No locks forced. The stills were intact. Just empty. Not even a trail of petals left behind. The Caliph was furious. Not because of the loss, but because of who noticed first: his mother. Legend says she awoke, sniffed the air and frowned. "Where is the second distillation?" she asked the servant. And so began one of the quietest scandals in Abbasid garden history. You walk around the distillation chamber. It's mostly ceremonial now, though you wouldn't know it from the number of copper vessels, clay jars, and shallow pans lying around. Some still hold rose petals. Others have been carefully cleaned and stacked ready for the next bloom. A faded scroll pinned to the wall reads, "They took the oil but left the scent.
So who then is truly poor? You grin. Abbasid scholars loved their rose water. It was currency offering medicine mood lifter. Added to baths, teas, pastries, inks. Even correspondence letters were sealed with rose-scented wax. To steal that much of it, it wasn't just theft. It was performance. You sit beside a low bench where two small amphorae lean half open. One carries a rich amber-colored syrup, rose honey. The other is dry, but still smells faintly floral. You dip a finger in the residue and sniff. It's heady, almost too much, but also kind of thrilling. Historians still debate who pulled off the heist. Was it a servant overlooked but clever? A rival noble trying to embarrass the Caliph? One theory blames a poet who needed it to create a scent-based riddle so elaborate it was never solved. Another claims a group of eunuchs sold it to a perfume merchant in Cairo who had no idea he was fencing royal property. You glance around the room. It's quiet now,
But somehow, you feel the chaos that once buzzed here. Some rose oils took 10,000 petals to distill a single ounce. The entire operation was tightly scheduled. Pick at dawn, crush by mid-morning, distill by nightfall. The idea that someone could empty the stills unnoticed. That's not just daring, it's ridiculous. And yet, it happened. You step outside onto a side path where climbing roses cover a lattice in bloom. Their scent is softer than the oil, greener, fresher, like the promise rather than the memory. A small sign hangs crookedly from one post. This trellis owes you nothing. You chuckle. Beyond it, more bushes. Roses of every kind, white blush, pink near purple. A few just thorns. One tree stands alone at the center of a circular bed, its branches oddly symmetrical. You approach. It has no flowers. Just a single copper tag that reads, "The tree we forgot to steal from." Poetic justice, perhaps. Or a quiet joke left behind by the gardeners after the scandal. You wander further into the rose grove, where the paths narrow and overlap. The air is thick now, not unpleasant, just saturated. You sit beneath a canopy of woven vines, and above you, bees drift lazily between blossoms. One lands on your sleeve, decides against it, and hums away. This garden never punishes. Even its thieves somehow become part of the myth. Before you rise, you find one more note scratched into a nearby bench in a flowing, almost musical hand. Steal a rose and it bruises. Steal its scent and it forgives. You pause. Smell the air. Think of the heist. The petals. The absence. And the fact that even now the scent remains. The rose scent lingers as you leave the grove, not on your clothes, but somewhere quieter, in memory, in the way your breath slows without realizing. You're back on a gravel path, now heading toward a small stone amphitheater carved into the garden slope. No walls, just open air benches and a single wooden lectern at the center, warped slightly by time and weather. You sit down curious. This doesn't feel ceremonial. It feels petty. And that's exactly what it is. You've arrived at the site of a feud. A bitter one. Welcome to the battle of gardeners versus poets. It sounds like a joke. It isn't. For nearly 3 decades, in the later Abbasid period, 2 factions jostled for control over the palace gardens, not through violence but through design. On one side, the gardeners, practical discipline, soil-stained. Masters of irrigation, composting, wind design, and seasonal planting. On the other, the poets, dreamers, aesthetic radicals. Obsessed with color, with metaphor, with the idea that plants should speak to the soul, not just the stomach. You sit on one of the stone benches, carved into it in uneven hand. He wanted shade, I wanted sorrow. That about sums it up. The feud began innocently enough. A poet tasked with designing a small courtyard for the Caliph's daughter arranged the beds to spell out a verse. Her glance bends the moon. Gorgeous, subtle. But the arrangement blocked 3 wind channels and caused 2 apricot trees to die from mildew. The gardeners complained. The poets refused to change it. Tensions rose. More trees died. Eventually, the Caliph issued a compromise. Each quarter of the garden would be governed by one faction. East and north to the gardeners, south and west to the poets. It did not go well. The gardener's side was flawless, fragrant, efficient lush. But it lacked soul. It felt correct. The poet's side was a fever dream roses, planted in spiral patterns, violets that bloomed only at dusk, even a bed where nothing was planted, just gravel, and a single rock labeled absence. Gardeners scoffed, poets rolled their eyes, and the garden suffered. Historians still debate how real the feud was. Some argue it was mostly theatrical, an outlet for political tensions disguised as artistic debate. But scrolls remain. Letters, notes passed between gardeners, dripping with sarcasm. Shall we water your metaphor today, or let it die of beauty? One poet fired back with a line still quoted today. Better a dead jasmine than a living cabbage. You laugh aloud at that one. You can't help it. Beside the lectern is a wooden crate. Inside, weathered scrolls and gardening tools. A rake, a broken stylus, a set of hand-painted planting maps. You unroll one and see the chaos for yourself. On the poet side, chaos. Swirls. Color groupings arranged by emotional gradient, anger, longing, reconciliation. On the gardener's side, symmetry, utility. Seasonal notes and sunlight charts, both brilliant, both incompatible. A breeze stirs the vines overhead. You look up. Above the amphitheater, a carved frieze runs along the top wall. It reads, "The garden feeds the body. The poem feeds the wind." Eventually, the Caliph grew tired of the feud. He declared a duel, a design contest. Each side would build a small courtyard. The winner would gain full creative control of the garden. The gardeners created a perfect replica of paradise, complete with symmetrical fountains, shade-cooled benches, and a date grove that ripened precisely in Ramadan. The poets, they built a labyrinth. Only one flower per turn. No repetitions, no instructions. Just scent, silence, and mystery. The Caliph visited both, then declared the kitchen gardens the winner, and walked off laughing. Neither faction was pleased. But the feud cooled after that. Today you can still trace the remains of the rivalry. A cypress row grown in perfect order next to a jasmine hedge cut into the shape of a verse. A compost heap that smells suspiciously of saffron. A sundial shaped like a broken heart. You stand and walk to the center of the circle. A breeze flutters a page from the crate. You catch it. A poem. We trimmed her stems for balance, she wept for the petals we stole. Let the gardeners have their seasons. We plant only what refuses to grow. Signed anonymous. But you already knew. You fold the paper, slip it into your sleeve, and walk away the wind, gently carrying the scent of something halfway between jasmine and pride. Because in the Abbasid garden, victory was temporary, but petty beauty that lasted forever. You leave the amphitheater of jabs and jasmine, feeling oddly refreshed. There's something invigorating about a centuries-old feud, with no real losers, just flowers, metaphors, and the occasional well-timed insult. You turn down a narrow path framed by fig trees heavy with ripening fruit. The garden feels quieter now, not solemn, but attentive, as if it's listening. And that's fitting, because what comes next is perhaps the most unsettling thing you've heard whispered along these paths: the fruit that foretold death. You first heard it as a throwaway line half laughed at by one of the philosophers near the fig tree. Don't eat an apricot before dawn, it might be the last taste you remember. You thought it was metaphor. Abbasid poetry leans that way. But here, where the path dips into a sunken garden cooled by overgrown vines, you begin to wonder. The scent changes first, not floral, not herbal. It's soft, overripe sweetness. Apricot. And beneath it, barely something sharper.
Like anticipation. This space is different. No flowers bloom here, no fountains trickle. The only sounds are the soft thuds of fruit dropping and the distant cooing of a dove you can't see. You pass a plug half swallowed by moss. You brush it clean. This tree bore fruit 3 days before the vizier was found floating in the canal. You blink. Okay, it might be a coincidence. You look up. The apricot tree is massive, old, each branch heavy with fruit that glows gold in the dappled light. Many have dropped. A few split on the ground, their flesh darkening, fermenting. And there, beneath one gnarled root, rests a bundle of cloth. You kneel. Pull it open. Inside a stack of notes. Each one records the fruiting of the tree. Dates, names, outcomes. You skim them. Bore fruit 2nd of Shaban Minister N. Arrested on the 5th. 3 apricots ripened overnight. Palace physician poisoned, died by morning. Single fruit fell at sunset. By sunrise, the Caliph's favorite had vanished. It keeps going. 15 entries. And here's the unsettling part. No entry claims the tree bore fruit without consequence. You stand quickly. Too quickly. The tree looms now. Its trunk is thick-pitted weeping sap in places that look oddly like tears. You remind yourself trees do not know things. They do not predict anything. This is just storytelling. A garden myth. But then why the notes? Why the shrine-like quiet? Historians still debate whether this tree was superstition or strategy. Some say it was watched as a matter of state, planted beside the west wall of the palace, so its fruit could be observed by those who understood the signs. Others claim it was a horticultural oddity, a variety so sensitive to human stress it fruited under atmospheric shifts caused by tension. That one's a stretch, but it makes you glance at the sky. There's a fringe theory too delightfully bizarre that the tree was grafted with knowledge, that its roots were nourished with ashes from condemned scholars, that the tree absorbed stories, secrets, and grief through its bark. Nonsense. Of course, probably. You step back just in case. To the left of the tree is a low bench carved in the shape of a half moon. On it sits a plate cracked and empty but edged with one word, if. You can't help but smile. There's something cheeky about it, this tree. This myth daring you to believe. Or at least to pause. Because in this garden, death doesn't shout. It ripens. And you realize something subtle but unmistakable. No gardener tends this space. No one prunes the tree. No one sweeps the fruit. No one touches it. It is watched, not worked. And perhaps that's what gives it power. Not because it causes death, but because it's the one thing in this garden that isn't beautiful. Not really. It's unsettling. And no matter how much jasmine grows nearby, the scent of bruised fruit always wins. You turn to leave. But at the edge of the path, a new fruit has fallen. You freeze. Just for a second. Then walk. Slowly. Not because you believe the myth, but because someone once did. And in a garden built on symbols, belief is architecture. You walk faster after the apricot tree, not running, just aware of how quiet your footsteps are.
how long shadows stretch when you're not sure what you're walking into. But the garden doesn't let you stay nervous for long. As you round the next bend, the light changes, softens, warms. The path narrows, overhung with delicate ferns and flowering vines. And ahead, you hear something faint. Not water, not birdsong. Something cooler, lower, breathing. You step into a small courtyard sunk beneath the main garden paths. The air here is cooler, surprisingly so. And you realize the moment your foot touches the ground, you're below the earth. Welcome to the gardens beneath the earth. At first it looks like a trick of light. But as you take in the arched ceiling above you, the faint glow pouring in from narrow slits carved high into the stone walls, you understand this is intentional. A sunken garden hidden from heat, from sound, from sight. You walk forward. The ground is packed clay, cool underfoot. Around you, low garden beds grow herbs that would shrivel in direct sun, valerian chervil, violet arugula, and a mossy green plant that smells like mint but isn't. You kneel and touch the soil. It's damp. How a low bubbling sound draws your attention to a small channel carved along the wall. Water cold and clear drips rhythmically into the beds. The source, a cistern above, fed by unseen qanats, those underground water tunnels that the Abbasids mastered. This garden doesn't just survive, it thrives where the sun can't reach. Historians still debate how many of these subterranean gardens existed. Some argue they were status symbols for elite homes. Others say they served a practical role in medicine quiet spaces to cool feverish patients. A few texts suggest they were used for conversation too private for walls. You believe all of it. You move deeper into the chamber. Light filters through narrow ceiling slits, turning dust into columns of gold. In the furthest corner, a small bench shot of carved limestone waits beside a box of tools, shears, a hand rake, a folded cloth, recently used. This place is not abandoned. The air smells of earth and peppermint, and something else, old linen wax. You spot a pot tucked beneath the bench. It's lidded, but steam curls from its edge. You lean in, inhale, chamomile and eucalyptus. A vapor bath. Someone has been treating someone here. There's a cot tucked into the alcove behind a thick curtain. The sheet is folded, the cushion slightly indented. A basket of violets sits beside it, half wilted. You sit on the edge and realize this isn't just a garden. It's a room, a sanctuary, a secret. And if the whispers are true, places like this were where deals were struck. Not on parchment, but in trust. Ministers brought their lovers. Scholars met their rivals. Poets confessed to gardeners. Some scrolls hint that certain assassination plots were discussed in rooms exactly like this, beneath ground, beneath notice. You cross to the opposite side of the chamber, where vines go up from a bed of soft moss. The wall here bears a single inscription carved into wet clay and left to dry. The earth knows what light forgets. You run your fingers across it. Some say gardens like this were designed to mimic the tomb, not morbidly, but as a reminder. Cool, dark, close to the bones of the world. A place to remember that all growth comes from silence, decay, and stillness. A fringe theory claims the caliphs used these spaces for mourning. After war, after scandal, after betrayal. They would come here alone, unannounced, and sit until the air had cleared, not politically, but emotionally. You believe that too, because you don't want to leave. This is the first garden that asks nothing of you. No interpretations, no symbols, no metaphors to decode. Just the air, the plants. The quiet. You sit, you stay, you breathe. And then you hear it. A voice. Soft, far away, humming. The melody flows down through a ceiling slit, warm as honey. It's someone tending the garden above. They don't know you're here. Or maybe they do. You smile. Rise slowly and head toward the stairway hidden in shadow. Because gardens beneath the earth aren't meant to trap you. They're meant to cool you down, to remind you that even below the surface, beauty grows. You climb the narrow steps, slowly, the stones still cool beneath your palms. As you emerge back into sunlight, the warmth feels like a rebirth, not harsh, but forgiving. The garden breathes with you, and you pause at the top, letting your eyes adjust. You half expect everything to be blinding, but the light is softened by shade trees and something else, movement. Subtle, intentional. You walk quietly now, following a narrow path between waist-high marigolds and fennel stalks. It curves unexpectedly into a low-walled courtyard where your breath catches. Because sitting neatly among flower beds and fig bushes, almost too still to believe, is a cat. A soft grey one. Lean, elegant, curled on a warm stone ledge, its tail flicking once lazily. It stares at you, then past you, and you remember what they say. The cats protect something. The stories vary. Some say garden cats were practical, kept for mice, watched over food storage, curled around the mint to scare off beetles. Others insist the cats of the Abbasid gardens were symbolic, even sacred. They appeared without invitation, left without warning, but they were always near something important. You crouch slowly, careful not to disturb. The cat watches, then blinks. You're allowed to stay. The courtyard has no fountain, no poetry etched into the benches. Just 3 raised beds, each bordered by smooth river stones. You move closer. In the first grains, barley, wheat, millet. The stalks sway softly, gold and green in staggered growth. There's nothing flashy here, nothing ornamental. Just sustenance. Quiet pride. The second bed holds spices, coriander, cumin, anise. Their scent sharpens in the sun. Practical. Valuable. Even exotic by local standards. And the third blank. Just earth. Freshly turned. Waiting. You touch the soil. It's warm. Not yet planted. This courtyard, you realize, isn't a showcase. It's a threshold. A place between the ornamental and the essential. Between beauty and function. And the cat still watching. Your eyes follow its gaze to the far corner of the courtyard, where a small wooden cabinet is wedged beneath a vine-draped arch. You cross slowly and open it. Inside scrolls, jars, and 2 bundles tied with black string. One labeled Inventory Emergency Foodstuffs. The other Preserved Pages, House of Wisdom Seed Division. You take a deep breath. This was a storage site. Not for treasure. For survival. It makes sense. When the House of Wisdom fell, its scrolls burned, its books thrown into the Tigris. It said that some pages were saved. Not by scholars. By gardeners. By cooks. By couriers. Who knew the smell of ink better than its meaning. They ran, they hid. They buried what they could in places like this. Places where no one looked for knowledge, only time and barley. And cats. Because the cats watched it all. You sit beside the third bed, empty and tilled. There's a folded square of parchment tucked beneath a rock at the edge. You open it. Inside a single line. What we grow will not save us, but it will remember we were here. You hold it gently. You imagine someone crouched right where you are now, hiding a page while smoke rose in the distance. A gardener who wasn't thinking of glory, just continuity. You rise slowly. The cat is gone. Of course it is. They don't stay. They just make sure the right eyes find the right corners, and then vanish. You walk from the courtyard with something quieter in your step. Something older. Not reverence. Not sorrow. Just knowing that this garden never belonged to caliphs. Not really. It belonged to the ones who stayed when no one was watching.
who planted wheat next to roses, who saved cumin with the same care as calligraphy, who guarded the scrolls with silence, and with claws if necessary.
By now, you've learned not to expect what comes next. The garden has moods, and none of them repeat. You've passed through secrets and survival routes and rebirth, and yet, as you follow a winding path marked with fallen orange blossoms, you feel something whimsical, a breeze full of birdsong, a giggle maybe two, and then a strange shimmer in the air, like sunlight bouncing off polished copper. You step into a clearing and find yourself face to face with a tree, a peculiar one. Medium-height white canopy leaves dense and glossy, and at its base a small wooden sign in the soil, the tree that sang at dusk. You squint. Surely this is metaphor. But then the wind stirs. The leaves rustle not wildly, not chaotically, but rhythmically. And you hear it. A note. Low. Almost like a flute. You take a cautious step closer. There's no one hiding. No instrument. Just the tree, the wind, and a peculiar sound that rises and falls like the breath of something dreaming. This is real, or at least garden real. The stories vary. Some say this tree was planted by a court musician who went blind and asked for music he could touch. Others believe it's an accident of construction, a product of how the wind is funneled through nearby archways and tiles. Still others claim it was designed an architectural joke left behind by a bored caliph. But one line from a forgotten scroll stays with you. At dusk the tree tells stories to those who have walked softly. You sit on a bench beneath it carved with simple stars. The tree sings again, longer this time. The sound is a mix between a sigh and a chime. And suddenly you understand why poets argued over it for years. Was it musical, natural, sacred historians still argue whether the sound is caused by wind hitting small holes bored into the tree's trunk, or by birds nesting in a way that mimics vibration? One theory even suggests tiny ceramic flutes were buried beneath the soil, triggered only when the temperature and airflow align just right. You listen. Whatever it is, it's beautiful. A gardener once wrote, "We planted basil for the stomach. We planted this tree for the ache we couldn't name." Around you, other plants seem quieter, as if yielding the stage. A few sparrows hop in the dust near your feet, but they too pause when the sound rises again. You notice something else at the base of the tree, a ring of objects, offerings, small things, a smooth stone, a glass bead, a folded scrap of cloth, a lock of hair, tied with red thread. Someone believed this tree could carry messages. You don't laugh. Not here. You just reach into your pocket and find the note you kept from earlier, the one from the gardeners versus poets' amphitheater. We plant only what refuses to grow. You fold it again, tuck it beside the glass bead, just in case. Because in a garden like this, you never really know. The wind picks up slightly, and this time the sound that comes from the tree is different. Higher, brighter, almost playful. You lean back, close your eyes. Let the music wash over you. It's not a song you'll hum later, not one you can record. But you know this much. It's yours now. And maybe if you walk the garden long enough, the tree will sing again. Not for answers, not for proof, just for company. You leave the singing tree behind, reluctantly. Its melody fades into the breeze like a secret that knows it's already been heard. The sky above you has shifted to tinged now, with that soft golden light gardens love best late afternoon, where shadows stretch like old friends, and sand becomes story. You walk slowly, and then it hits you. The smell. Rain.
But there's no rain falling yet. Just that intoxicating first scent, rich mineral, ancient. Petrichor. The scent of dust of long dry stone, remembering what it means to drink. And beneath it layered like a whisper, palm resin, wet earth, basil bruised by wind. You've entered the moment when Baghdad smelled like rain. You hurry forward not because you fear getting wet, but because something in the garden is about to happen, and you don't want to miss it. The sky overhead is dappled with clouds. Not heavy, not urgent, just enough to turn sunlight to shadow and shadow to music. The path narrows into a colonnade, and as you pass beneath it, you hear the first soft drip of water hitting leaf. Not thunder, not downpour, just promise. The garden responds instantly. The marigolds tighten slightly, the petals hugging themselves. The fig trees perk up their leaves, spreading wider almost expectantly. A gardener once wrote, "We don't water. We call the sky by its real name." Rain in Abbasid Baghdad was rare, but when it came, it was celebration. Not in feasts, not in fanfare, but in the way the city exhaled, in how the dust settled, in how silence deepened. You reach a low wall overlooking a secondary courtyard, normally dry, but now filling slowly with runoff from the eaves. The water forms tiny rivers along the mosaic tiles, catching stray petals and carrying them gently toward the drains. Everything here was designed for this moment. Small channels hidden beneath garden beds redirect the water so no drop is wasted. The roses closest to the wall are lifted on angled terraces, so the rain runs beneath, not directly onto them. Their petals are too delicate for impact. You crouch beside the rose bush and listen, not to the water, to the leaves. They make the softest sound, like fingers brushing silk. The rain continues a little harder now. Still polite, still warm, but with confidence. And then you spot it. A child. No more than 6 or 7, darting between orange trees. Barefoot head tilted up to catch drops in her mouth. She twirls arms out like the garden is a partner she can't resist. No one stops her. Because no one owns the rain. You sit on a low bench and take it in. Historians still argue whether Abbasid rainwater management was more practical or poetic. The systems were advanced, graded drains, underground tanks, flood diversion beds. But the records also speak of rituals, placing bowls of saffron outside to catch golden light, of washing feet in the first rainfall to remind the skin of beginnings. Some gardens even scheduled prayer walks for the first 5 minutes of rain. Not religious, just personal. Quiet loops to reconnect with the soil, the self, the source. You decide to take one. You leave the bench step off the path and begin a slow, deliberate circle through the gravel walkways. Your fingers graze wet leaves. Your sandals soak just enough to cool your skin. You pass a tree and see it holding water in the curve of its leaves, offering it to whoever needs. The wind shifts, the scent sharpens. Somehow, impossibly, it smells like memory. You close your eyes, and it takes you moments from earlier, the rosewater theft, the mint laid out by a silent woman, the moonlit scrolls of underground seats, the fig tree humming with philosophers. All of it, dampened now, not erased, just softened, like soil made workable, malleable. Alive. A gardener once wrote, "Rain doesn't end a garden. It begins a new silence. The drizzle lightens. The child disappears. The petals glisten. And the air smells like you've waited all day to be here. Because maybe you have. Because maybe this is the moment the entire garden was holding its breath for. And now it exhales. And so do you." The garden has quieted. You know that sound, don't you? The post-rain hush. Like the world is listening inward. Like even the fountains have paused to reflect. Every branch carries a drop. Every petal leans a little lower, like it's been told a secret. You're in that in-between time now. Not quite dusk, not quite day, just soft. You follow the path to a low terrace made of warm sandstone. It's empty save for a small wooden table and a folded linen cloth. The kind someone might have used for tea, or a ladder, or nothing at all. You sit. The garden exhales around you, and then I detail the stones beneath your feet, carved gently with vines. Not stylized, not symmetrical, just vines, winding erratic, following their own logic. It hits you slowly, these stones weren't made for display. They were made for someone who sat exactly here, needing to be reminded nature doesn't follow straight lines. And neither should you. From this spot you can see almost everything. The rose garden to the west still glistening from the rain. The fennel fields to the east thick with the scent of licorice and dust. The narrow alley where you first glimpsed that cat gone now but not forgotten. The poet's bench. The irrigation trench like a stitched scar in the earth. It all spreads before you, not as a plan, not as a blueprint, but as a story. One you've been walking through for hours, or years, or centuries, if gardens measure time that way. And the story somehow is still being written. Historians still argue whether this final garden, the one deep inside the Abbasid estates, the one rumored to be kept only for caliphs and their ghosts, ever truly existed. Some say it was a myth cobbled together from diaries and merchant gossip. Others insist it was real, just hidden too well. But you know better. Because you've seen the olive tree grafted from 6 mothers. You felt the seed vault breathe beneath your feet. You've touched the parchment with a gardener's last words. And now you see the last door. It's barely a door at all, just a break in the stone wall framed by 2 palms, whose fronds lean in like guardians. You rise, cross the gravel and pass through. The space beyond is small, circular, enclosed by high walls woven with creeping jasmine. At the center, a single raised bed, empty. But the soil, it glows, not visibly, not magically. Just alive in a way that doesn't need words. You kneel. You reach into your satchel, yes, you've had one this whole time, and remove something you almost forgot you were carrying, a packet. Sealed in wax. Labeled only night blooming seed. For when silence becomes unbearable. You open it. 3 small black seeds smooth as river pebbles. You plant them one by one. You don't ask what they are. You just press them into the soil, cover them gently, and sit back. Because sometimes the point isn't to know. It's to plant anyway.
The sky above you dims to violet. You remain still. The vines on the wall begin to tremble ever so slightly with the breeze. And if you listen closely, you can almost hear them growing.
And now the garden settles. You remain seated beneath the jasmine, your breath slowing to match the rhythm of something far older than time. No more paths to walk, no more doors to find. Just you and the soft living earth beneath your fingertips. The wind has become a hush. The leaves sway like lullabies. In the distance a single nightbird calls, then falls silent. Your limbs soften. Your thoughts loosen. Everything that needed to be uncovered has been. There's nothing left to fix. Nothing left to chase. Only the gentle warmth of the soil beneath you. The memory of old stories humming in the roots. And the possibility, just the possibility, that something beautiful will bloom while you sleep. Not because you willed it. Not because you watched, but because you dared to plant even in silence, even in doubt, even in dreams. So tonight you let go. You let the garden hold your weight. Let the rain from earlier whisper one final blessing against your skin. You did enough. You stayed long enough. and somewhere in that deep fragrant darkness, a seed is cracking open just for you. Good night, traveler of gardens. Sleep well beneath the fig leaves, and may tomorrow rise soft and slow like jasmine warmed by sun. End of script. Sweet dreams.